Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Are there any questions from last week before we begin regarding just the marriage? Nothing about divorce, just marriage. Right. So that's what we said, is that there's difference of opinion among the scholars. So Imam Abu Hanifa has one opinion where he says he doesn't need to say yes, the guardian does not need to say yes, but if the person is not properly suitable for the woman, then he has the right to annul the marriage, meaning petition that the marriage gets annulled, void. Right? So that's a right that he has. And the rest of the scholars, they say, yes, the guardian's permission is a requirement for the marriage to take place. Okay? So
the reality.
Yeah, so the reality comes, and the protection for the woman and her choice comes through judgment. So it comes to third parties. So basically, if the guardian is preventing her with no good reason, she needs to send her case to the judge. The judge will decide if this guardian is oppressing her or not. And if the guardian is oppressing her, then she falls in the category of somebody who does not have a guardian. Either they're going to bypass this guy and go to the next guardian. If he has the same problem, bypass him, go to the next guy. If all of them have the same problem, then he will be the guardian of the woman, just like the non-Muslim, or the one who has no guardian. So the judge will become the guardian. So in the second opinion, if she's being prevented, then she goes straight to the judge, and the judge will decide. In the case of Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion, it's the opposite. So she goes ahead and gets married, but then if the parents say, no, the judge is going to side with me, assuming that they're right, then they have to go to the judge instead of the woman having to go to the judge. So that's the difference. But in the end, the judgment is always there as a protection. And that's the statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Whoever has no wali, then the wali will become the imam, the leader of the community. Now this is the practical thing. So what is the judge in this case? In this case, the judge is like the local Muslim leadership. Right? If you have no leadership at all, and there is no community or leadership whatsoever, right? Then you say, well, and this is a problem in many communities, right? So you say, well, where's the justice and where's this, and there's too much room for abuse. The thing is, if you don't have decent leadership, there's room for abuse in everything. Your masjid is not going to function, your wudu area is not going to function, you won't get the proper meat that you want to eat, nothing will function. So it's not that the Sharia is deficient because it didn't take this into consideration. If your leadership is completely broken and there is no organization whatsoever, everything will break down. The marriage will break down, the masjid will break down, the prayer will break down, everything will break down. So the thing is, if we're considering the worst case scenario, it's going to break everything. So the thing is, Islam generally assumes or hopes that once you establish a decent level of infrastructure or leadership, then everything else is going to get taken care of through these rules. If there's no leadership and no structure, then no amount of rules, no matter how many rules you implement, none of them are going to matter anyways in the end of the day. So that's really what I know exactly where you're coming from. So that's what the thing is. When you understand, and you know what, you say, well, why didn't they put more rules for protection of women or something like that? You could put 100 rules in place. If the people are going to be completely corrupt, the rules don't do anything. They're not going to be able to do anything. What are you going to do? Declare war on every family? Like have an army, surround them or something like that? It's just not going to function. Right? If the army is corrupt too, then what do you do? Right? So this is the problem. So it has to be at least some decent level of leadership to carry out these rules. Otherwise, the rule of law doesn't work. It's like we pride ourselves in America about how great the law is, and the law is over everything. But then what's happening when you violate the law? When NSA spies on us, it's a violation of the law. When drones go and attack other people in violation of international law, it's a violation of the law. So who's going to do something? So we have United Nations. United Nations is a great international law body, and it's going to take care of everything. It doesn't take care of anything. It's not stopping any of this stuff. So you have to have a good leadership as well. Otherwise, nothing's going to function. Okay. So the thing is, turning down a walima or a wedding banquet because there's certain prohibited things taking place. It's not that you have to turn it down. It's that usually you're not supposed to turn down a wedding banquet But if there's something prohibited, that's a good excuse for turning it down. Now you have to use your best judgment and your wisdom on what you're willing to, what you're going to accomplish by going there, and what harm is going to be accrued by going there. So let's take an example. Somebody sent me an email and said, clarify more points here. So there's a lot of points there. There could be alcohol being served. There could be, non-halal food being served. Or there could be, dancing or, some kind of, other activities, mixed, dancing and all of that stuff. So the thing is, obviously, that's not in the realm of Islam. The thing is, where do you draw the line? You have to draw the line generally in the sense that, can there be more benefit if you go, or can there be more harm if you go? Right? That's where you really have to decide. So it's a tough decision sometimes, but you have to know, what are you planning on going there for? What are you going to accomplish? So I'll give you an example of myself. Sheikh Faqih and I, we discussed this a lot. So you say, if you go there and some of the stuff is going on, let's say alcohol is being served, right? So we have these discussions among the imams in the community. Should you go if you find out that alcohol is going to be served in a place like this? We'll say, on one hand, it looks like you're condoning this gathering that's taking place because alcohol is being served. So therefore you shouldn't go. That's a good point. It's a good argument. And someone made the opposite argument. And they say, you know what? If alcohol is being served, then the type of Muslims that are going to that place, right, are generally the Muslims that rarely, almost never come to the masjid, not even for Jummah. Because the ones who come for Jummah, generally they're going to not be in a place where alcohol is being served. We're talking about Muslims who are very, very far. And you're going there and you're being asked to give a 20-minute lecture. This is your only opportunity that you're going to get to actually speak to these people, to maybe wake them up, or maybe give them a good reminder to bring them back towards Islam, because they don't come for your Jummah khutbah. And the Eid khutbah, either they don't come or they don't listen because people are talking. I'm going to, focus on the sisters. I apologize. Especially the sisters section. No one can hear because the sisters are particularly talking during the Eid khutbah. That's a major problem. So, where are they going to get a reminder from? You're never going to meet them in the street. You rarely meet. I'm not going to, go and attend their gatherings generally. So if they're inviting me, should we go or should we not go? You have to weigh the pros and the cons. So if people really think that, this is a justified banquet because you're speaking over there or you're attending, then there could be a major problem. But if there's more benefit and you just going and giving a lecture and then saying, you talk to some people and say, we should try not to do this and try and make some adjustments or something like that, there could be more benefit. So it really depends. So the whole reason of talking about the justification for not going to a wedding banquet was that you're supposed to go generally. But then these are the exceptions where you don't need to go. Yeah. See, again, so the thing is, you have to sometimes go beyond what one or two people say, and you have to look at the whether the harm is going to be worse or the benefit is going to be worse. So one or two people will say, or maybe a few people will say, look, she was there, that means it's okay. But at the same time, if literally when you go and you sit down and you're at that table and you have a strong personality and they were going to go and talk about whatever, iPhone this or this, Mehndi party or this Shah Rukh Khan video that came out, and you have a strong personality and you're able to, shift the conversation into a positive direction. That's going to be a time where you can reach out to them. Now, if you see the same people outside, then there's no need for you to be there. Right? So you can go and talk to them at another time. If these are people that you're never going to see outside and you never get an opportunity to talk to them, this may be your opportunity. Right? So you have to look at it sometimes that way. So every situation is going to be different. It's really going to be different. If these are like your friends and you're going to talk to them anyways about random stuff, then it's better you don't go, because it's going to be perceived that you're approving it. But if it's going to be the opposite, literally you're going to sit at a table with a bunch of people where you really don't know or you don't get to see them, this may be your opportunity. But then again, if you're shy and you're going to sit there and just listen, it's better you don't go then, because you didn't achieve anything. Yeah. The thing is, whether people are offended or not offended, it shouldn't bother you. If you take a principled stand and you explain your stance, people will be offended about everything. People will be offended the fact that you're wearing niqab, or people will be offended the fact that some sister's wearing her hijab, or someone's offended the fact that I have a beard. So why don't you make it shorter or something? That's not my problem. I can explain to them the wisdom. If they still have a problem with it, I'm not going to lose sleep over it because this is what Allah wants me to do. So you don't lose sleep over it. Personally, when everybody stands up and then the bride and groom are walking in and everything, I'm pretty much the only guy sitting down because I just don't feel comfortable standing up for that. Right? So I'm sitting down, everyone looks at me, and I say, you know what, this is your problem. I got research to do, and I'm going to pull out my phone, I'm going to read a book or something. I came for the lecture, and I came for to congratulate the couple, but I'm not into the whole, red carpet walking in and all that. So I will be sitting down, even though the MC, who really annoys me, has to ask specifically everyone to stand up. And I say, this person doesn't command my obedience. He's not like the Khalifa or something like that. So if he tells me to stand up and I remain sitting down, I don't care. If someone's going to go and do the Star Spangled Banner, for example, and I decide to sit down, that's the law in America. Somebody even tells you in school, say the Pledge of Allegiance, you have the right, you have the First Amendment right to stay seated. You're going to look weird depending on which state you're in. If you're in California, you may not look weird. If you're in Alabama or something, you may look very weird. So it depends where you are. But there are times where, you take a stance. And there are times where, if it's not a big deal, you compromise in a sense that, this is not a big deal, so I'm willing to compromise on it. So if it's a stance you firmly believe in, you take the stance and you don't worry about what other people have to say. Inshallah. So, let's start with divorce. Inshallah. So divorce. Remember, marriage is a contract. Okay? It's a contract in Islam where there are rights and there are responsibilities for both spouses. So when it's felt that these responsibilities are very difficult to fulfill, you cannot fulfill your responsibilities anymore, or the rights are being violated, then this contract may be terminated. And there's a specific procedure on how it's going to be terminated, and that's known as divorce. Now, this is actually a big blessing because a lot of people don't realize what a blessing divorce can potentially be. Now, divorce is not the nicest thing, but at the same time, it's a blessing in the sense that if you look at the Christian church, right? Christianity traditionally has held that divorce is absolutely prohibited. Nobody can get divorced, no matter what the grounds are. And that's why King Henry VIII, he had an issue with, wanting to get divorced and all that. That's how the Church of England, kind of formed, because the Pope wasn't giving him permission to divorce one of his wives, and he didn't really want to be with her, and it's a long story. Anyways, so the thing is, that wasn't allowed. So divorce was completely prohibited. In Hindu culture, for example, divorce is something that, as far as I'm aware of, is prohibited, right? It's not allowed. And traditionally, it used to be that, if your husband dies, the woman has to, go and get cremated or burned or killed along with the husband, because it's a permanent, like literally life. When they say, till death do us part, like it's literally like till death do us part. And the same thing in Christianity. So in Islam, there is no till death do us part. It's like till, this is really not going to work out anymore, do us part. Right? That's pretty much what Islam says. And that's a huge mercy, because there are many people who are stuck in relationships that are not working out, either because it was the wrong person or they're just not compatible or whatever. So it's a huge mercy that Allah actually allows for this contract to be terminated. But of course it sets certain stipulations there to make sure that it's not being abused, and the importance of marriage is kept, and it's not being not being removed for no reason. So divorce can fall, the idea of divorce or getting divorced can fall into one of the following categories. It can be recommended. So divorce can actually be recommended in certain circumstances. What are the circumstances in which it's recommended? When somebody neglects fulfilling the rights of Allah. Or somebody is not fulfilling the rights of Allah. Your spouse is not praying. Your spouse is not dressing according to the Islamic dress code. Your spouse does not want to fast in the month of Ramadan when it's time to fast. Your spouse wants to go and do something prohibited in Islam. That is, and if there's no reconciliation and there's counseling and you're trying and everything, that can actually make divorce recommended. Now keep in mind the word recommended. That doesn't mean it's required. It's not absolutely required that you separate. So you can continue to live with that person, but that may have an effect. So usually it can get to the level of recommended, but again, it depends on individual circumstances. If you have 6 children, and those children are in need of, let's say, their mother, and the mother is there and she only wants to pray 4 times a day for whatever reason. She wants to skip a prayer or something like that. And she just refuses to wake up for Fajr because she parties at night or something like that. Does divorce, I'm just giving you an example. You can apply analogies. The thing is divorce still recommended in that state? In that case, it may not be recommended, depending on the circumstances. Let's say you're a very poor person. You're not very attractive. You've been married several times before. If you get divorced now, you're not likely to get married again. You need somebody to take care of your children. You're a very busy person at work. You work very hard. You work 3 jobs. Is it still recommended for you to get divorced? It may not be, given the circumstances. Right? Because the priority of taking care of the kids, even though there's a little problem here, someone's disobeying Allah, but at the same time, there could be a good ground that, it's going to be worse if you get out of this relationship. So meaning that it can be recommended if somebody's violating the rights of Allah, or not neglecting the rights of Allah. Yeah. We're talking about divorce right now. So the reason why women divorcing is called khula, which is different. So we're going to talk about that. So yeah, it can be the opposite. It may be grounds for khula, okay, for removing the marriage contract. When is divorce allowed? It's allowed, you have to pay attention to this part. It's allowed when someone is neglecting to fulfill the rights of their spouse. So we say, well, wait a minute. Typical American mentality, right? Wait, if the person is not fulfilling my rights, then I'm going to get divorced. And in Islam, it's allowed. It's not even recommended. Right? Because if your personal rights are being violated, if it's affecting your religion, then it goes back into the recommended category. If it's not affecting your religion and you can just live with it, then you can do that, there's nothing wrong, but there's nothing specifically required that says you should get out of this marriage. Because you may have your rights neglected at work. You may have your rights neglected by some of your friends. You may have whatever rights you have. So it doesn't mean that necessarily you have to break the marriage, get divorced. And this is a big problem for a lot of people because they say, well, if you don't do 100% of all the rights that I have, then I'm going to get divorced. Okay, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily recommended all the time either. So that's important to understand. Divorce can be disliked if you get divorced for no good reason. There's no reason, everything's going okay, but just going to get divorced anyways. That's disliked. Now what does disliked mean? Does it mean that it's prohibited? It's not prohibited. If you did that, you would not be sinful in the sight of Allah. But it's disliked. It's something that you should try to avoid. Right? Because why would you just get divorced for nothing? Say, I just want to be alone for a while, or I want to try somebody else, or whatever it is. That's not a good reason. There should be a good reason. And divorce can be prohibited, pronouncing the divorce can be prohibited at certain times. And we're going to be talking about that. And that particularly refers to performing the divorce at the wrong time. So the time has to be right, meaning, let's say, divorcing a woman during her menstrual period, which we're going to be talking about. This is prohibited. So if you pronounce a divorce during this time, it's not allowed. It's against Islam. And I bet you 99% of Muslims don't know this. Okay? So, convey the message to everybody else. So we're going to talk about that today. So these are the categories of divorce. Now, how do you divorce? Right? How does it actually happen? Right? This doesn't mean that I'm recommending it. Okay? The how-to part. But these are the steps which should be done. Everyone should know this. So if it ever happens one day, if you do it the right way. Because Islam, shows and teaches us a way to kind of dampen the impact or dampen the damages that can occur. So in order for a divorce to be valid, first of all, it needs to... So keep in mind, we're talking about two things. Divorce, when we say divorce, we're talking about the man divorcing the woman. And then we're going to cover afterwards what's called khula, which means the woman demanding a release from the marriage, from the man of the marriage. There are two different things, and that's why usually when we use the word divorce, in Islamic law, we're talking about the man divorcing the woman. And the principles of when to get divorced and all that generally apply both sides. But the way in which it's done is not the same across the both sides. So just keep that in mind. So, in order for a divorce to be valid, it must be done by a mature male who is sane and in a state of consciousness. So that's like the dictionary definition, right? So, if somebody is sleeping, right, and they're like half asleep and they sleepwalk, or so they talk in their sleep, and he got really mad and they had an argument that night, and he kind of, says, you know what, I'm sick and tired of you, divorced. Okay, does that divorce count? Now, if the guy's in like half asleep, it's not a state of consciousness. So there's nothing to get really, worried about or something like that. What about anger? This is a common question. So does anger count as being in a state of consciousness? Right? So it depends on the type of anger. There are generally 3 levels of anger. There are those, that first level of anger is like you're upset, but you still know what you're doing. The second level, it doesn't really have an effect on you. The second level of anger is the anger will highly influence your actions, right? But then what happens is after a while, you kind of calm down and, you realize, that was said out of anger. I didn't, really mean that. And that happens almost immediately, right? And the third type of anger is one that, it's completely overcomes you. And you have almost no idea what you're saying. Like somebody who's just in a complete, can't even remember what they're saying, right? So if you're at that high level of anger, where literally you can't even understand what you're saying, then in that case, it would be in the state of, not in a state of consciousness. The other levels of anger, which are normal anger, most people fall into that category, it still applies. So the divorce counts. So you need to be very careful about your anger and controlling your anger because it can count as well. Okay? So the correct way of divorce is to pronounce, so this is the way someone should pronounce divorce if they want to. The correct way is to pronounce one statement of divorce. So you tell your wife that you are divorced. And you only make this statement after her menstrual period has ended and before they've had intercourse. So it's during the period of purity and in that entire period of purity before they've had intercourse. So what is the wisdom behind that? We're going to talk about that in a moment. So that's after the menstrual period is ended. Okay. Now there's an exception to the rule. The exception to the rule is if the marriage had not been consummated yet, or if the wife does not have a period, then what do? In that case, divorce can be at any time of the month. So it doesn't have to be in a specific time frame. And the reason and the wisdom behind that is the unconsummated marriage, right, has not, the couple has not tasted intimacy yet. So the whole point behind this really is that the desire, if you divorce somebody during her menstrual period, during the menstrual period you're not allowed to have intercourse. You're not allowed to be intimate at that level, right? So the thing is, when you get in the period of purity, the wisdom is that you're going to be inclined, or the guy is going to be more inclined towards his wife because he can have, full relationship with her. So at that time, he's most likely going to be rethinking and reevaluating the circumstances. So this is actually what happens. Actually, there's a lot of wisdom involved. The more you think about it, the more it starts to make sense. Number one, generally women during their period are more likely to provoke the men due to the period, due to the hormonal changes and everything. And at the same time, men are more likely to divorce their wives because the fact that they're not getting fulfilled in the sense of them having intercourse. That's why it's prohibited to do it during her period. And it has to be done afterwards, right? After the period is over. Now the question is, well, why does it have to be done before the couple has had intercourse? Why not afterwards, in the middle of the month or something like that? It's still during the period of purity. It's because the man has just experienced an entire period of time where he's not had intimacy with that, or that level of intimacy with his wife. So he's been waiting for it. If he had it, then somewhat it's been fulfilled. So getting a little bit fulfilled is not going to give the same kind of desire, or the same kind of desire for reconciliation, or the desire to control your tongue and say, you know what, I am going to stay with this woman. Does that make sense? So hopefully the wisdom makes sense. It's pretty, there's a lot of wisdom in all of that. So that's that. So before he has intercourse with her, and then after he pronounces that divorce, he waits until she completes her 3 menstrual periods. So now he's divorcing her in the period of her purity. When we say purity, meaning woman has a menstrual period and then it stops, so that's called the period of purity. So he divorces her in the period of purity, and then he waits for her to have 3 more menstrual cycles. After those 3 cycles end, he doesn't say anything else, just lets it go, the divorce is finalized. And the divorce is complete. Okay, so this is the way that Muslims are supposed to get divorced. Now, to be honest, in my experience of several years of divorce counseling and everything, I don't think I've ever had a single person come to me tell me that they actually did it this way. Even though this is the way it's supposed to be done. Almost no one has actually done it correctly this way, unfortunately. So this is why it's really important. So this is how it happens. Now, there's a lot of wisdom. We're going to talk more about the wisdom of why this procedure and all of that. So this is the best method of divorce because it gives the husband a sufficient amount of time to reflect on whether or not this marriage should continue. So now he has about 3 months to decide and think. And in the meantime, he's not allowed to touch her. He's not allowed to be intimate with her. Any type of intimacy. It's not allowed during this time. But she's still living in the house. Right? So this gives the person a sufficient amount of time to think, rather than the whole concept of, people still have the concept of divorce, like, okay, we're gonna finish this off in one shot. We're gonna pronounce like 1 million divorce or something like that, and boom, it's all over, and that's it, it's finalized. And then what happens usually, almost 90% of the time, right? Both couples, they start regretting. So we shouldn't have done that, and now we're stuck, and we should have thought about it and all of that. So if you would have followed the Islamic way in the first place, we wouldn't have this problem. That's the whole reason why Islam implemented this level of divorce. Right? So it's not there really in any other system. American law has that in the sense that it just takes such a long time to file the paperwork and the court process and all of that. It's not really due to the fact that you get a waiting period. It's due to the fact that processing and all of that, and now you probably can't pay the judge because the government shut down and all of that stuff. So you have all these other problems. We got one extreme that just divorce and it's done, it's finalized. Belgium is the exact opposite. You have to literally wait 2 years before your divorce processes, which means you can't get married in 2 years. So even if you wanted it, we're very happy with the divorce, it's over and everything, you literally have to wait 2 years before the divorce goes through, which is really, really unfortunate and pretty ridiculous. Why, whatever the reasoning behind that is. That's why Muslims in Belgium, we'll talk more about civil marriage, but for them, there's an exception to the rule where it may not necessarily be required for them to get civil marriage. They can just do the nikah part and then do the civil marriage later. Because waiting 2 years is a lot of time, unnecessarily. So anyways, so it gives the husband sufficient time. As I said, the possibility of intimacy will help alleviate the tensions. The man will be tempted to take his wife back and resume the relationship. If the man, however, goes against Islam and divorces her during her menstrual period, then that divorce still counts. Okay, it does count. But it is recommended that he actually revoke the divorce and take it back. So this type of divorce we're talking about so far is revocable, which means you can take it back. So what he should be doing is, if he does that in her menstrual period, it will count as a divorce. And if you wait another 3 menstrual periods that go by, the divorce will be finalized. But it's recommended, because what he's done is sinful, he should take it back. Some scholars say he must take it back. He has no choice but to take it back. Right? And you can only divorce 3 times. So this counts as 1. When you take it back, you're left with 2. So it's like you just lost 1 opportunity. So it counts, but it is sinful. So it is against Islam to do so. And the reason why it counts is to prevent abuse of the wife. Right? Because if you say, oh, well, it doesn't count, and then you get really mad, and you say, oh, it's your period anyway, I'm just going to say divorce, you're divorced. Psychological damage. And you say, oh, well, it didn't really count anyways, right? It has to count to make the contract serious. So there are 3 types of divorce. First type of divorce is something which is revocable. So the revocable divorce is this one. So the first time when you pronounce a divorce, that divorce can be retracted. So retractable or revocable, which means that during that period of time while you're waiting the whole time, the husband can decide to take the wife back. Meaning, I'm canceling that divorce, I'm sorry for saying it, and let's continue. Let's continue this relationship. Let's make it work, basically. So this is the husband's right, because he has the right to pronounce the divorce. He has the right to revoke, to take back the divorce as well, to revoke it during her waiting period. Okay, so that's one type of divorce. Second type of divorce is the divorce that is irrevocable. What happens is, if that time period expires, then it's over. You can't go and say like 2 days later or 1 day later after the time period is over, so I've changed my mind. The divorce that I did, let's make it work again. You cannot take it back anymore. So irrevocable means if the time period expires after you pronounce the divorce, you cannot take it back once the time is up. So the divorce is finalized and it's finished. Both of you are divorced. So what do you do now if you decide that, we shouldn't have gotten divorced? You can get married again. You can get remarried. So that means new marriage contract, another marriage ceremony, another dress, another, all that stuff, another, party, and another mahar. Absolutely. Another dowry as well. So, and she can, this time, especially if the guy is really regretful, well, this time it's going to cost you more. It's not going to be the same price. So the gift has to be greater or whatever it is. So they can negotiate that or whatever it is. But they can get remarried with a new marriage contract. Okay, and everything starts over from scratch. The divorces start as if that divorce never took place. It is a brand new marriage, but you're allowed to get married again. Okay. Now there's a third type of divorce, and that's the final divorce. Okay, the final divorce is when a woman has been divorced 3 times. Okay, if she's been divorced 3 times, then this divorce is finalized and there is no retraction. You cannot take it back. And you just sit there and let the time run out, basically. There's nothing else you can do. And when this happens, and the marriage, and the time runs out, this final divorce takes place, the two of them, after her waiting period is over, they cannot get remarried again. They're not allowed to get remarried again unless or until the woman marries another man. And if that marriage breaks up, then she's allowed to go back to this first guy if she wants to. Now, what's the reason for that? The reason for that, or the wisdom behind that, is that basically when it's a final divorce, if the man has pronounced 3 divorces, it means that this relationship is really not working. So you don't want to remarry this guy. You shouldn't be allowed to remarry this guy. You need to try somebody else. You need to move on with your life. Right? If this happened 3 times now, you need to move on with your life. You need to go and try another relationship somewhere else. If that relationship also fails, this divorce takes place or the marriage is canceled or whatever it is, then in that case you say, well, I've tried somebody else and it seems like actually the first one would have been better for me. So let me go back and let's try and get remarried again. Then you can get remarried again. So I'm going to mention this twice. This is one time I'm going to mention this, is that you cannot have the intention, a woman cannot have the intention to go and marry another guy with the intention of getting divorced from him and then just so she can marry her first husband. This is not allowed, it's completely prohibited in Islam. Because just think about what that is. They literally have to consummate the marriage. Just think about how, disgusting that is in the first place, how immoral that is in the first place. You're going to marry another guy, right? Assuming that he's a sincere guy, you're going to be tricking him and saying, you know what, I want to marry you, we're going to consummate the marriage, and then you get out of the marriage and say, no, I want to get out of this marriage. You get out of this marriage, and just so that your intention the whole time was so you can go back to your husband. Just think about that, think about what it says about you, and think about what it says about your first husband too. You just went and slept with another guy so that you can come back with me. It's almost like a form of prostitution, right? So there's a problem there. That's if the guy is sincere. Now imagine if the guy is not, because you lied to the guy who's sincere. If the guy is not sincere, right, and he makes it his job to marry women who just so that they can remarry their former spouse, it's like a gigolo, right? It's like a male prostitute. So just think about how can Islam allow something like that? So this is completely prohibited in Islam, and many scholars have even said that it doesn't even count if it happens. However, other scholars have said it does count if it happens. And I think that it should count if it happens because you've just slept with another person. So, I mean, if you've done all of that and you still decided to go back and the husband actually wanted you back and stuff like that, what you've done is haram. But after all of that's happened, it can count. But you should never do it. It's really, really haram. Right? So you don't do something prohibited like that. And it wouldn't, I would not expect anyone to do that. But there's this concept in Islam that I know a lot of people, I've heard that they do things like this. Unfortunately, I've never come across anybody, but I've heard that stuff like this. Did anyone come across something like this? Scholars have differed on this. The thing is, what do you do if, see the thing is, does the marriage count in the sense that she can go back to the other person now? Yeah, you're right. It doesn't count as a marriage in and of itself. That's their intention. That's not a true marriage. So that's why it's prohibited, it's haram. The question is, can she go back? Agreed, the marriage is sinful in and of itself. It's almost like adultery. The question is, can you go back after you've done something like that? It depends. So the thing, even if it's null and void in the sense of it's being prohibited, right? This is where scholars have differed. Can you go back to your first husband or can you not? Yes, I know. So when Allah has cursed somebody, it doesn't mean that... Anyways, it's a different opinion and you should never do it in the first place anyways. Right? So inshallah, it's never going to happen in the first place. Right? It really happens all the time? This should not be happening in the first place. You know, it should not be happening in the first place. Okay, so this is pretty ridiculous. Let's leave the question, inshallah. So, where are we? So this is a final divorce. All right. So she needs to move on with her life. If a man pronounces more than one divorce in one statement, all right, or he pronounces more than one divorce in one period of purity, right? It is a sin on him. This is probably the most contested issue among modern Muslim scholars today. More contested than probably the issue of interest, right? Or banking or Islamic banking or whatever issue you want to talk about. Does 3 divorces, if you say you're divorced, does it count as 3 in the sense that now they can never ever get married again until they go and marry somebody else? And this is exactly why people are going to these gigolos. And I don't want to call them halal, I call them gigolos. That's basically what they are. So this is why they're going to these male prostitutes, basically. What happened was, during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, during the time of Abu Bakr, during the time of Umar in the beginning, when you say a statement like this, it counted as one because you're not supposed to be doing it in the first place. So it's not something that's allowed. So it was held and it was generally considered by everyone as this counts as one. So if you get mad and you say, you're divorced. In case you didn't hear it correctly, you're divorced. And by the way, you're divorced. So if you say it 3 times, it still counts as one because you're only supposed to do one divorce in the first place. Right? If you say it 1,000,000 times, or if you say, you're divorced times 1,000,000. And people do this actually. It's actually Egyptian culture actually. I've seen this a lot. So, you're divorced, milyar marrat or something like that, 1,000,000,000 times. Just to emphasize the point to cause harm or something like that. Does it count? Can you count a divorce as 1,000,000,000 times? You can't obviously. So they say, the 1,000,000,000 counts as 3. So the thing is, does it count as 3 or not? So Umar radiallahu anh, he saw that people were abusing this. Okay? The people were abusing this and people were going and harming their wives and pronouncing all of these divorces, and it's a psychological damage. So he said, in order to stop people from doing this, he said, now we're going to kind of take this according to our custom, because the custom has changed. And when the custom changes, some of the rulings can change in Islam. It's not that he's changing the rulings. So the custom has changed. People are doing this in order to, humiliate their wife or in order to cause harm to their wife. And he says, we need to stop this. Therefore, these statements that you make, they're going to count. So whatever statement you make 3 statements, is going to count as 3 statements. And then you're going to regret and you're going to feel like a fool and you're going to want to stay with your wife and you're not going to be able to do so anymore. In order to watch your tongue. Majority of Muslim scholars from that time have taken the opinion of Umar radiallahu anh. Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, taken that opinion and stuck with it because that was a good opinion. It was a good opinion for that time. It was a good opinion for several other times. Later on, some scholars went back and they looked at the situation and they said, look, okay, we understand what he did and it made sense and everything, but now we have the opposite problem. The opposite problem is too many people are breaking up their relationships and then they're regretting, and there's children involved and everything, and they can't get married again. And then we have these prostitutes coming out and stuff like that, saying, the only way to get remarried is going to be to marry me and consummate the marriage and go back, and it just causes a whole lot of problems. So modern day scholars have looked at those scholars and said, look, what's best for our circumstances? To go with this opinion or to go with this opinion? So there's a huge debate still about it. But several of my teachers, and I'm pretty convinced that seeing the circumstances in which we're living and what's going on with all the excessive divorces taking place, and because people's ignorance of how to divorce in the first place. See, I didn't know that, if I say it 3 times then I can never get married, and if I said it once then I would have had time to think about it and all of that. Because of that, I think it's better to go with the other opinion. And the opinion that used to be during the time of the Prophet and during the time of Abu Bakr, that it counts as only one. Even if you say it 1,000,000 times or 1,000,000,000 times or whatever it is, it'll still count as one. Okay, so again, like I said, this is a hotly contested issue. And this is a difficult issue to deal with because we get it on a daily basis. So what do you do if somebody follows that opinion, but now they're coming to you? So what opinion do you give them? What do you do? How do you decide between what to do? It's a very tough decision. But I feel that this is a better opinion, and this is many scholars today, they feel this is a better opinion as well. But the problem is not the intention, because many men, they have the intention of why do they pronounce 3? The problem is when it comes to divorce, there's a statement of the Prophet peace upon him says it's not about your intention. Right? Your intention is it doesn't matter if you're intending or you're joking or whatever. This is a serious matter, so it's taken seriously. Right, so I'll give an example about that a little bit. So it's an issue anyway, so that you understand. So this is my opinion. I'm pretty convinced about it for now. I'm willing to consider the other side. So there's a lot of debate among scholars, but this is to protect people. So you shouldn't. Again, it comes back to this issue. It's prohibited for you in the first place to be pronouncing more than one divorce in one period of purity. It's not allowed for you in the first place until you've retracted the previous divorce. It's haram. The question is, does it count? Right? So why are you doing something that's prohibited in the first place? Right? So we should not be doing that as Muslims, and this is known as the talaq or the divorce of bid'ah. It is the innovated divorce. Right? So it's something that didn't exist before, and people started making it. Now, why did they do that? Why did people start doing this in the first place? They say, you know what? Allah has given me this. Allah told me to divorce and then wait this time. But you know what? I want to speed that up, and I want to make sure that I don't change my mind. Allah told me you need to wait and have some time in case you change your mind. And I want to say, no. I want to speed it up. I never want to change my mind. So I'm going to stop myself from ever being able to retract this divorce, and you pronounce 3. It's just contradictory. You're taking away the mercy of Allah that He's given you. You shouldn't be able to do that, or if you do that and you're able to do it, it's sinful in the first place. A man may delegate the option to his wife to divorce. So this is something which is actually allowed. So usually this will happen, traditionally, if the man doesn't want to divorce the woman. And the woman keeps saying, come on, divorce me. And he says, no, look, you need to just calm down. He says, no, come on, if you want to divorce me, you don't like me, then just divorce me. So if he decides and he says, look, okay, I give you the permission. You have the right now to call the divorce. So if you have the right to call the divorce, if she calls the divorce and she pronounces the divorce, she says, okay, you pass the right on to me, I'm divorced now. That divorce will be effective. So he has the right to pass the divorce off to her. If he says it generally, it just counts only at that moment, like during a fight or during an argument or something like that. If he has his cool and he says, you know what? If she wants to do this and she wants to lose her cool, let her bear the responsibility of the divorce rather than me. Say, I give you the authority now. If you want to get divorced, I'm not going to say it. I give you authority now. If you say it, then you divorce yourself. This counts. And if she says, okay, that's it, I'm divorced, the divorce will count just as if he said the divorce, but it came from her. This is allowed. It only applies in that gathering, in that situation. But then if he says, I grant you the right of divorce whenever you want, anytime you want, then now she has the right of divorce as well. Not something I recommend. Okay, I definitely don't recommend that, and probably the women or the sisters also would not recommend that. When they're calm and they're thinking, when there's not heated debate going on, they'd probably say maybe it's best you don't do that because it'll cause a problem. Now, getting to stipulating in the marriage contract, that's something else. I know the women want it, and the women want it because the Western influence. I'm very convinced about that. But if they understood the principle of khula properly, they would not want it. But they don't understand the principle. So when they understand the principle, they would not want it so much. So I know there's actually a council of imams in Texas. They actually wrote a marriage contract which stipulates this clause in the marriage contract that the woman automatically has the right to divorce herself. Right? In the marriage contract, and everyone who gets married from that group over there, it's built into the marriage contract. Because they say, well, in America you have the right anyways to do that. The woman has the right, so therefore we should make it Islamic as well, since it's binding legally. So let's throw that into the contract. So I was very opposed to that, and several other imams were opposed to that. But that's something that they chose, and they have that marriage contract over there. The man can also give authority to another person. So this is basically, you are allowed in Islam to transfer authority on something. This is just a basic principle. This is not a marriage principle. You're allowed to transfer authority to somebody to buy and sell on your behalf. So for example, you say, you know what? That money on the table here, I give you permission to use that money to go and buy something on my behalf, even though it's my money. So based upon that, that's a general rule. You can do that in things. That's like power of attorney, right? It's like power of attorney. So it's like you're giving power. So it applies to marriage because it applied to economic transactions as well. It's not that it's a thing that was in marriage, like, you're allowed to do this, or you should do this, or the Prophet ﷺ said you can do this. It was not something generally ever done. But it was an analogy that was applied on economic transactions. It was not part of the intrinsic marriage, procedure or something like that, as far as I know. So you can actually give authority to another person as well, which I don't recommend. But if you're one of those people who's, someone's saying, well, you don't got the guts to divorce, or, this marriage is not working, or this is not, and you say, you know what, you're right, I'm in an abusive relationship, and, my wife is abusing me, and I need to get out of this relationship, but I don't have the courage to do it. And my parents know. It happens. Trust me, it happens. Trust me, I get these cases. You'd be surprised. Right? I don't mean physically abusive. I mean psychologically abusive. Right? And you'd even find physically abusive. Oh, you'd be surprised. I've seen brothers with literally scratch marks across their chest. They had to be hospitalized. No, I'm not joking. Oh, I'm not joking. There's brothers who've been stabbed by their wives. Okay, so it's not like something that doesn't happen. Oh, I've seen it. Trust me. If the guy's going to get beat up by his wife, okay, if he's going to get beat up by his wife in the first place, I guarantee he's not going to have the guts to divorce her, right? Because it wouldn't have gotten to that point, right? So the thing is, he has the potential to give power of attorney over to somebody else. So if he's like his best friend, says, you know what, this is going too far, I can't take this anymore, or to his parents, to his father, and says, you know what, Dad, it's your decision. When you see that, you know what, I'm getting abused to the level and I can't take it enough, I'm giving you the power, I'm giving you the authority to go ahead and divorce on my behalf. You can do that potentially, right? So it could happen. Retraction of divorce. Remember, the first divorce or the one divorce, it can be retracted. So how do you retract a divorce? Before the couple is separated and the time period runs out, you can retract that divorce, and you don't have to have the permission of the wife, because the divorce is coming from the man. So if the wife says, no, I don't want you to retract it. You're just gonna let it go. It's not in her hand on this type of divorce. So during a revocable divorce, what happens? So if you pronounce one divorce and you're waiting these 3 periods, what actually happens during this time? The wife is treated like a normal wife, in the sense that you can be in the same room with her, you can eat with her, she's still, with the kids, taking the kids and all that stuff, treated like a normal wife. She has a right to be in your house. She has a right to maintenance, what we call maintenance, living expenses, buying food. She has a right to get clothing and all of that stuff. The only thing that you're not allowed to do during that time is intimacy. There should be no intimacy. No intimacy meaning any type. No kissing, no hugging, no sensual touching or anything along those lines. So everything else, she's still your wife, but obviously since you're in a state of revocable divorce, right? So there's a difference. So understand that revocable divorce is not like a final divorce. It's not like all of a sudden she's not your wife anymore. She's still your wife, but she's in this period. So some people really get confused. When they hear divorce, they think the marriage is over. That's not what it means, if you do it correctly, according to Islam. Okay? Huh? She does not need to cover in front of you. She's still your wife 100%. The only thing is you don't have an intimate relationship with her. She doesn't need to cover or anything along those lines. Now, if you want to retract the divorce, and you say, okay, we're going to make this work, I'm going to cancel out the divorce, how do you do it? You do it one of two ways. Either you speak it by saying, I've taken you back, or you show some intimacy. If you go up to your wife and you kiss your wife even on the cheek, or you go and you hold her hand nicely and you say, I love you. That's automatic retraction of the divorce. Even if you didn't mean it. That's your problem, right? That counts that counts as retraction of the divorce. Because that's what you're not supposed to do that when you're in a revocable divorce period. So while she's in the waiting period, if you do any of that, whether it's by action or by word, it counts. Now when you do something like that, it's recommended, not strongly recommended, but it's recommended to have like some witnesses, or let them know that, okay, your friends that you told that you're in a state of divorce, let them know that, I've taken her back, so we're not in a state of divorce. In case some situation gets bad, at least you have some proof that, you did, get remarried again. So you can do any of those things. So a woman who's in this period of retractable divorce, what should she do? Okay, if she wants to remain married, then she should dress up, she should be nice, she should not, start getting upset and yelling and screaming at the husband. If she doesn't want to stay married, and she says, I don't want this guy anymore, then she should still be nice, but not super nice, right? So hoping that the marriage is just going to finalize and finish itself off. But the problem why I'm stressing this is, many women, they think that they're just going to do whatever they want. He violated my right, and he's this and he's... If you really want to remain married, obviously this is your opportunity to do something to convince him that the marriage should continue, right? And also, there is this conception that the woman's not allowed to make herself up, because if her husband dies, which we're going to talk about, she's not supposed to be wearing makeup and dressing up and all of that. So sometimes they mistake the two, and she says, I'm not going to dress up, and I'm not going to wear nice clothes, and I'm not going to do this. Okay, that's not applied to this type of divorce. That's if your husband dies. It's different. So this is a time where you should be nice to your husband, make up and try all of these things to, get him to retract the divorce. So remarriage. Okay, so if the divorce is not retracted. So once the divorce is retracted, by the way, you take the divorce back, now you're living like a normal married couple. 6 months pass, and you have another problem again. If you pronounce another divorce, you start counting. So the first one counted as one divorce, this is number 2. Means you only got one left. You don't even have one left. The next time you pronounce divorce, whether it's 50 years later or whether it's 1 month later, right, after taking her back, or whether it's 5 hours later or something, that's your third divorce and that's your final divorce, and now you cannot get remarried again. Okay? Be careful about that and realize that the numbers are there. Now, why are the numbers there? Why is the number 3 there? Why not just say, why not 5 or 10 or something? Because this type of divorce is in the hands of the man, it's a right to prevent the woman from being abused. If he's just going to keep on pronouncing divorce, okay, I take you back now. And then divorce, okay, I take you back again. It's psychological damage. So to prevent that from happening, the limit has been 3. Technically it's 2. Even the Quran said, at-talaqu marratan, meaning it's 2, you get 2 chances basically. The third one, it's over. So technically don't even count it as 3 chances, you get 2 chances. Alright? If the waiting period is over and the divorce is finalized, and it's only the first or the second divorce that you had, it was not the third divorce, the man may marry her with a new contract and a new dowry, and they can continue their life together, and then the counter resets. The whole divorce counter resets because it's a brand new marriage. After the third divorce, there can be no retraction, and there is no remarrying her until she weds and consummates with somebody else. expressions of divorce. So what are the expressions, the wording that's used for divorce? Divorce can be enacted through the following statements. Whether or not they are said in a state of seriousness or jest. So even if you're joking and you say, you know what, you're divorced. Ha ha, I was just kidding. That counts as divorce. Right? Why? Because this is a very and that's based on a statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him. This is a serious contract. This is like you walk into a bank, right? And then you sign a contract and you say, okay, I'm opening an account and everything. You sign your name and everything. And then when you're done, and they take the contract and say, I was just kidding. You can throw that away now. I didn't really mean to open up that bank account, Or you go and you sell something on Craigslist and you trade the money and then you sell your car or something like that and you say, I was just kidding. I wouldn't really sell you my car for that price. Give me the car back, I'll give you the money back. You can't do that. Once it's done, it's done. This is a serious thing. You don't joke around about it. So even if you're joking, it still counts. So you don't even joke about divorce. Okay? So how does divorce take place? It can be explicit. So you say words that are explicit. And just like marriage, the word should be clear. Right? So if you say, you know what? You're going to be divorced. Is that clear, explicit wording? No. It's something in the future. So you say, well, no, you divorced me. You say, no, I say, you will be divorced. So it should be clear. You are divorced, or you're a divorced woman now, or I'm pronouncing a divorce, or I have pronounced a divorce, to make it as clear as possible. So that's explicit. So that's one way. The second is conditional. All right? Some people do this. So if you put a condition in there, so for example, you're going to be divorced if you enter into that bar, or you walk into that nightclub one more time and you're divorced. The moment she walks into the nightclub or she walks into the bar, that divorce counts. So conditional type of divorces will count. Okay? And the third is an implicit divorce. So now if an implicit divorce, which is not explicit wording, so if you say, for example, go back to your family. In many cultures, go back to your family means like you're divorced. Right? So if it's not clear, then it only counts if you had the intention. And if you didn't have the intention, then the implicit divorce is not going to count. So another wording is, for example, I don't want you anymore. So if the wife understands that and says, he said he didn't want me anymore, that means I'm divorced. So she goes and she calls up her family and says, you know what, he just divorced me right now and everything. And the guy says, what are you talking about? I didn't divorce you. I was upset and I don't want you anymore. That doesn't mean that I divorced you. No, that's what it means. It means it's divorce. Even my parents said that's what it means. I said, no, my intention was not that. So on an implicit statement, the guy's intention determines whether or not it's a divorce. If he said, yeah, that's exactly what I meant, then it counts as a divorce. If he says, no, that's not what I meant, then his intention does not count as a divorce. So if he says, we are finished, or you're now single, and books of fiqh have like 100 different examples of how to make these different statements. So the statement is not explicit, only counts if the man had the intention to divorce, and he must admit to it. So he has to admit that yes, this was my intention, or that no, this was not my intention. So to clarify. Otherwise, it's not going to count as divorce if it's implicit. The waiting period. So what is the waiting period? The time when the divorce took place, whether or not it's final or whether it's revocable, it's the same waiting period, and that is 3 menstrual cycles. Okay, so whether it's a final divorce or a revocable divorce, or if there's a separation, the same thing happens. Separation means that a Muslim judge issued a separation. So if he issued a separation, there's still a waiting period. So there's 3 types of divorce. This is just a side note. There's a divorce from the man's side, there's a release from the woman's side, and there's a cancellation of the marriage from the judge. There's 3 types of ways of 2 people separating. Okay? The judge's decision means that it doesn't matter what the other 2 parties want. The judge rules this marriage is annulled, it's annulled. For certain reasons. There's reasons which we'll talk about. So, the waiting period is 3 full menstrual cycles. And I want to emphasize the word full. So what does full menstrual cycles mean? It means if you divorce your wife during her menstrual period and you didn't take it back, even though it was sinful for you, it's going to count, right? So now do you count this menstrual period or you don't? You don't, because it's not a full one, because it was in the middle. So somewhere in the middle, even if it was at the first day or whatever, it's not a full menstrual cycle. So you wait until the next one starts, and then you start from there. So 3 full menstrual cycles, or if she doesn't have a menstrual period, then 3 months, if she is not menstruating, menopause or whatever. If she's pregnant, then her waiting period is when she gives birth to her child, or she loses the child. Okay, this is and it's clearly that the child is lost. That is the end of her waiting period. During this period, she should not move to another house. Okay, what does that mean, she should not move to another house? It means that she should continue to live with her husband during this time, during this period. Okay. Now, if it's a revocable divorce, living conditions are different, and if it's irrevocable divorce, then living conditions are obviously going to be different. Now, if a man dies, so there's 2 types of waiting periods. There's one divorce waiting period, and in this chapter we can also talk about the same thing. We can talk about another type of waiting period, is if a man dies. So if a man dies, for widows, the waiting period is for 4 months and 10 days. Completely different. So one of them is 3 menstrual cycles. If a husband dies, woman is supposed to have a waiting period of 4 months and 10 days. If she's pregnant, then her waiting period changes to delivering the child or losing the child. Okay? So this period, what is this period? This period is a mourning period. It's a period of mourning in a sense. But it's not a mourning period like Hindu culture or other cultures, whatever it is. It's a different type of mourning period. There's many wisdoms behind it. So during this period, what should she refrain from doing? She should refrain from wearing perfume, adorning herself, wearing nice clothes, wearing makeup, wearing jewelry, all of these things, unless there's some valid reason to do so. Unless there's some excuse or whatever. The woman in her mourning period, and this is the most important part, she should not be proposed to for marriage. So this is part of the wisdom behind it. So during the 4 months and 10 days, she should not receive any marriage proposals directly. However, Quran makes it very clear that it's allowed for someone to give an elusive reference to the idea of marriage. So that she kind of gets the idea that, you know what, there is somebody for me. I can get remarried. Now, what is an elusive reference to a marriage proposal? If someone was in a conversation or something along the line, someone comes along and says, I really would like to get married, and I'm looking for a good, pious woman as well. Inshallah, Allah will, hopefully, find me one. You leave it at that. That's an elusive reference. She's like, she can kind of get the point, but it's not clear. You're not making a proposal or anything like that. No promises that I'm going to marry you afterwards. Right? So, don't make it too direct if you were going to do that. Right? So the direct would be like, I'm looking for a really good woman like you. Then you have a problem, right? So, elusive reference. The woman may leave her house. Okay? This is not house arrest. And many people think that. Right? A woman may leave her house, but she should be sleeping in her own house. Every night she should sleep in her own house and not somewhere else. Because it's the husband's house, that's where he passed away. Now, if there's an exception to the rule, in the sense that she has no family to help her, she has no one to take care of her, she's all by herself, and there's nobody. This is, in traditional societies this doesn't happen, but in our society this happens. It's very frequent. So in that case, of course, she can move to another house. If her family is living somewhere else and she needs family to help her or something like that, she can move into the other house, or the family should move in with her to help her through this time and all of that. Now, the mourning, by the way, mourning doesn't mean she's crying and she's lamenting and she's ripping her clothes or whatever different people do. Mourning for actual sadness is only for 3 days, and you're content with the decree of Allah. So she's not crying and why Allah, why did this have to happen to me? And all of this is prohibited in Islam. This is not allowed. So this is a different type of thing to protect her, and before she gets remarried and other people, because this is a very vulnerable time for women. If you lose a husband, it's a very, very difficult time. And men, especially knowing men, this is a great time to take advantage of different people. So that's what this is another wisdom behind this period, that she's not going to be taken advantage of, because now if she's lost her husband, she's got kids, someone needs to take care of me. Any guy can come up and propose, right? And she's going to be like, okay, well, I need some support or something like that. So this is a time for her to, kind of get over it, kind of think straight, make sure she's making the right decision. Because generally this is going to be an elder woman. So her wali is not going to be always there to protect her, help her make the right decision. So if the woman didn't know that she was in her waiting period, this is like a side note as well. If she didn't know that she had been divorced, for example, or she didn't know that her husband died, does the waiting period count? Like let's say 1 month later, her husband was on a trip and she got an email from him saying that you're divorced, and she didn't check her email. Right? So now she checks all of a sudden, so he clearly told me, or video message, right? Like on Skype, saying that you are divorced. And she checked it 1 month later and he's on a business trip and they didn't have contact or whatever it is. I'm giving you a random scenario, theoretical scenario. Then does she count as being in her waiting period since that time? Yes, she does. She doesn't have to have knowledge of it. If her husband died somewhere and she finds out 2 months later that her husband was somewhere and he had died and she didn't know where he was, that still counts as part of her waiting period, even though she was not doing the things that she should have done. So that's the question. So she was not, she was wearing, let's say, makeup and she was going out and all of that stuff. Does it count or not? Yes, it counts. From the time that her husband had actually died. Because there's other aspects, and that is clearing the womb, making sure she's not pregnant. There's so many different aspects involved in the waiting period. The waiting period of a woman, this is like a side note. Again, this should not be happening in the first place, but it happens, unfortunately. The waiting period of a woman who's in an adulterous relationship, meaning in a relationship of zina, fornication. They're not married and there's two people in a relationship. They actually have to have a waiting period as well. So let's say she decides, alhamdulillah, I've seen the light and I'm coming back to Islam and I'm going to dedicate myself to Allah. But she was in a relationship before that. What does she do? Does she have a waiting period before she said, I'm going to be pure now, I'm going to actually marry somebody else, proper person, can I get married? Do I have a waiting period? Yes, she has a waiting period as well, if she's been intimate with the guy. And the waiting period starts either when they separate or they resolve to not have intercourse anymore. Like 100% it's stopped. That's when the waiting period for them will start. A divorce which takes place before consummating the marriage doesn't require any waiting period. So if you've not consummated the marriage and you get divorced, there is no waiting period. That woman can go and marry somebody else after a while, because the marriage has not been consummated. So one of the major wisdoms has been removed, and they've not experienced intimacy and all of these other things. The wife demanding release, what's known as khula. I couldn't think of a better one-word English translation. Does anyone know one, of a good one? Wife demanding release from the marriage contract? Getting something more technical. Demanding release. I think demanding release works. This is more of a wanting to get release from the marriage. Because it's kind of like if she feels stuck in the marriage, that's when she's going to demand release. Otherwise, she can convince her husband that, you know what, you don't want me. And if she doesn't want to be, you don't want me. You don't want, I just threw some extra salt in your food. You don't want this every day. I'm going to keep doing this until you divorce me. It's if that's not working, or you shouldn't do that, by the way. This is against Islam, obviously. I prefer demanding. It's not seeking, because she's only going to be doing it with a very legitimate case. And if it's a legitimate case, it's gotten to a point where she can't take this anymore. She really doesn't want this marriage anymore. So I feel demanding is a better term than simply seeking. Okay, if she's seeking it, if she wants to get out, then she can start asking him and convincing him, come on, divorce me, just let's get out of this. This is where he's saying, no, I'm not going to divorce you. So then she says, okay, you know what? You're not going to divorce me? I need to get out of this marriage relationship. So it's more of a demand than it is a seeking. So a woman has a right to remove the marriage contract by doing what? By returning some or all of the dowry that she received. So this is the way that she gets out of the marriage contract. And the reason why this has been stipulated is because so that there's no harm to the husband, excessive harm to the husband. The reason is this actually happens. And I actually know several cases of this, where someone will say, you know what, I want a dowry of 50,000. And the guy said, oh, this is, good-looking girl and all of that. And okay, yeah, it's going to be great. So he gets into the marriage. And then all of a sudden, she's like, After 1 month, that's it. This marriage is over. I want to get divorced and I want out. It's like, what? What is that? No, I just don't want to be married to you anymore. And you find out that she's been doing this with 5 or 6 other guys. 50,000 from each one of them. All right? This is a major problem and it happens. I don't want to tell you which part of the world is happening, but it happens particularly from women. Right now it's happening, particularly from Muslim women in a certain part of the world. Some of them are actually pretending to be Muslim, they're not even Muslim. And they're doing this to Muslim men. Right? So this is unfortunately happening, it's going on. So this is why it's, you just see the wisdom in all these rules, really. So this is something that's, okay, we need to speed up. So this is something that it's allowed. So you have a right to remove the marriage contract by returning part or all of the dowry, and that has to be agreed by both parties. So the wife has to agree, I'm willing to give you this much of your dowry back, and the husband has to agree that, okay, I'm releasing you from the marriage, but I'm going to take this much back. This has to be done for a legitimate reason. When the wife demands to get released from a marriage, it has to be done for a very good, legitimate reason. Otherwise, it's considered to be a major sin. Okay, so it's very important that she has a good reason. What can a good reason be? Now, let's talk about some reasons. Reasons can be, he's abusing her, he's not giving her her rights. That's a sufficient reason. And reasons can even be, this whole major sin thing, means like, if she's at fault, and then she's demanding to be released, this is something she should not be doing. But there's been a woman who actually said, to the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, I need to get rid of this. I just can't stand to look at this guy anymore. He just, like when I look at him, it's like I feel like I want to puke. That's how ugly he is. I just can't stand the way that he looks. Well, why did you get married in the first place? Yeah, it was a family thing and they kind of, pressured me and I gave in. But I just can't stand this guy. That's actually a legitimate reason to get out. Although you don't have to get out. I'm reminding you. I don't want to see a bunch of CIS students all of a sudden, So I never liked this guy in the first place and all that stuff. So, no. So the thing is, he has to agree. He has to agree. I'm going to explain all this. It's all coming. So he has to agree. The reason why he has to agree is, one, he could have divorced her in the first place if he wanted to. Now he doesn't want to, so he's getting something back. He has to agree to give something back, and they can negotiate. If he says, you know what? I want you to give me all my 50,000 back. And she's like, no. You gave me that much, and I've been a good wife up until now and everything. I'm willing to give you, 25 back, or I'm willing to give you whatever it is. So they basically need to. The dowry usually, if it's not a big amount, it's not an issue. Sometimes it can be an issue. So the husband is not allowed to keep the wife in this marriage in order to harm her. So this is Islamic principle. So if he says, no, you know what? I'm not going to divorce you, but at the same time, you're just going to have to be stuck with me, and I'm going to treat you the same way I've been treating you, and that's actually going to be a great way to get you back for everything that you've done to me all this time. This is completely un-Islamic. It's against Islam. So that's not allowed. So he cannot keep her, and that's clearly mentioned in the Quran, in order to harm her. So if she has legitimate grounds, then he has to let her go. The reason why he has to agree is because, again, the demand from the wife may not be a legitimate demand. So that will, if she was just allowed to simply say, okay, well here, you know what? Here's your $100 back, and I'm out of here. Right? So then again, it's almost like her having divorce in her hands completely. So then the whole concept of the man having divorce in his hands wouldn't be applying. So that would just violate the entire wisdom of the man having the right to the divorce in the first place. So that's one. Now, if the discord, the problem, is from the husband's side, then it is disliked for him to take anything from her. So if he knows and he realizes and his friends are telling him, look, you're the problem. You're not spending time with her. You're the one who's abusing her. You're not fulfilling her rights. And now she wants to get out and you refuse to divorce her as well. Then it's recommended Islamically that he should not take anything from her and he should grant her the khula to get out. If the discord is from the woman's side, she's the one who's causing the problem, but at the same time she wants to get out and he doesn't want to divorce her, then it's disliked for him to take anything more than the dowry. So he can take up to the dowry he gave her, but he should not be demanding more than that. Okay? Although if she's offering So you know what, I'm going to give you, I'm just, I don't like you and I just want to get out or whatever. I'm giving you all this, you can have it. He's allowed to do that, but it's disliked. Now the question is, the most common question that's going to come up is, well, what if he refuses? All right, what if he refuses and I need to get out of this marriage, but he's not willing to grant me this, and he's actually, I'm begging him, I don't want to be in this marriage anymore. He won't divorce me, and he won't grant my release. So what do? That's when you go to a Muslim judge. And the Muslim judge, the whole point of doing this is the Muslim judge is going to be the third party who decides whether the grounds for release are justified or not. If they're not justified, it's almost like a counseling session. Saying, you know what, this is ridiculous. The guy parked his car the wrong way. He parked his car behind your car, and because of that, you actually want to, get out of the marriage. That's ridiculous. That's not a good grounds for doing it. And you'd be surprised at the grounds that we get. Very, very strange things. This guy, I don't like the way he wears his tie or something like that. This is like almost a counseling session. It says, look, this is not a valid grounds to get out. If you have a valid grounds to get out, then the judge is simply going to say, okay, this is a valid grounds, but here's the benefit of going to the judge. This is very important to understand. So when you go to the judge, now you've submitted this case for judgment. So what's going to happen is, the husband is not releasing the woman. If the husband is shown to be at fault in the sense that she has legitimate grounds to get out, and she's even willing to give some back of her dowry, and he says, no, I don't accept. She takes it to the judge. If the judge decides, yes, she has legitimate grounds, he dissolves their marriage. Dissolving the marriage means she keeps everything. So because of the fact that he, caused this whole ruckus and everything, they had to go to a judge and all of that to get, third party, he gets nothing. So now it's not khula anymore. It's not releasing anymore. The judge doesn't say you have to release her. Now it's dissolution of the marriage. What's called fasakh. So the judge says your divorce now is finalized. You guys are separated basically. The guy gets nothing, and the marriage is finalized. So it took place anyways. So that's the difference. Okay. Again, if the judge is biased, right? If the judge is biased, he's going to cut your hand off. If the judge is biased, he's going to put you in the death penalty, right? If you have a messed up judge and the whole system is messed up, anything can happen to you. You can just go and if you go to a country where there's oppression, they're going to take you in for nothing and they're going to put you in jail. Like what's happening even for Muslims in America, right? You didn't do anything wrong and some agent is biased, they're going to go and put you in jail for nothing. What do? No rules or laws is going to help that. It's not going to be able to do anything for you. So when it comes to judgment, if the system is corrupt, laws cannot help you. So no one should blame Islam and say, oh, the laws didn't take into consideration that the judge is biased. What needs to happen in that case? Revolution. This is a hint. So anyway, that's the only thing that can happen. Swearing off the wife. Another type of divorce. This is called ila. It comes under the category of divorce. Swearing off the wife. If a man says to his wife, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to come near you. Meaning that I'm not going to have intercourse with you anymore. This is something that people used to do culturally in Arabia in order to harm their wives. And some people may still be doing it. So if he does that, it counts as a vow, right? We talked about vows. So if he wants to break his vow, he has to expiate. The problem is, if he swears that I'm not going to come near you and I'm not going to touch you, I'm not going to have intercourse with you, and this is like an oath that he's making for a long period of time, or if he says, I'm never going to come near you again. Now he has 4 months. He has a period of 4 months. So this foolishness cannot continue for more than 4 months. So Allah put a restriction. You have 4 months to decide what you want to do. If you decide to break your vow, you have to break your vow. And if you break your vow, you have to expiate. Right? What is expiation for a vow? Feeding 10 people, clothing 10 people, freeing a slave. Do you have the option of fasting for 3 days? Only if you can do this, right? So he has to expiate. Now, if 4 months pass and he's being stubborn and saying, no, I made a promise, I'm a man of my word and I'm going to keep my promise. So 4 months pass, now he has a choice. Either you expiate or automatically this counts as divorce. You cannot be with your wife and not have intimacy with her because of this vow type of thing you're doing. You have to make a decision. If he decides, no, I'm undecided, I don't know what to do, that counts as divorce. After 4 months, automatically a divorce counts. It counts as one divorce, and then the waiting period begins. This is a punishment for him for harming his wife. It's not a divorce if he breaks it before 4 months, but if 4 months pass, it counts as divorce. Okay? That's his punishment for doing something like that. But if it counts as only one divorce, so if the waiting period ends, he can remarry her again with another contract, if she chooses, of course. Injurious comparison was called zihar. This is another form of divorce, probably very, very rare, but it used to happen in Arabian society, and therefore Islam talked about it. A man used to say to his wife in that time, you are like the back of my mother. Okay, you're like my mom. So what does he mean? He meant, when somebody said that in Arab culture at the time, he meant that you're like my mom, how can I have a relationship with you? So I can never go near you anymore. It's like the previous one, but it's even worse because he would say this and say, now that I feel like you're like my mom, I could never ever go back to somebody I can never go to my mom, so how could I ever possibly go to you? So now the woman at that time wasn't able to get divorced. Now she's stuck in limbo. She's stuck being married to him, and this was polygamous society. So they had other wives. They say, you're the stuck wife, just sit there, right? And I can never come near you. I cannot touch you. So this is a way to harm her, basically. I can't be intimate with you because you're like my mother. Or any other wording that basically says something that you cannot be intimate. You're like my sister, or you're like my daughter, or something like that. He is not allowed as a punishment for the statement. So there were many men who would say something like that, and then 1 month later they would go to their wife and say, oh, I was just kidding, So what do? In order to you harmed her to that extent. That's in that culture, that was like the biggest insult you can say to a woman. Right? And then you go and continue having her like a normal wife. So in this case, Islam says, if you do something like that, you're not allowed to go near her. You're not allowed to go near until you expiate. And you have to have an expiation. Now the expiation for a vow, feeding 10 people, clothing 10 people, that's pretty doable, right? That's pretty easy. It's not that difficult. So now, here, he has to expiate, but it's not the same expiation. Completely different expiation. So the expiation is, it's Arab custom, expiation has to be in this order. Number 1, he has to free a slave. Now for people who couldn't afford that, that's very expensive. Right? Freeing a slave was very expensive at the time. If he can't do that, if he's unable to do that, he has to fast for 2 months in a row. This is a big punishment. You don't play around with your wife like this. So you fast 2 months in a row. If you break that fast 1 day without a good excuse of being sick or something, you start from 0 and you do another 2 months. And you're going to keep on doing it. That's your punishment before you can even go back to your wife. And she's still your wife. And then, if you can't do that, and literally you can't do that because you're too old, you're too weak, you're diabetic or something, you got to feed 60 poor people. Okay, not 10 or something like that, you got to feed 60 poor people. So this is the expiation for this type of injurious comparison. And this is clearly in the Quran, and it shows you the type of abuse that used to happen and how Islam set certain things in place to stop the abuse. And there's so much wisdom when you think that this will probably almost never happen. I hope, inshallah. It's never going to happen in anyone's life. But just looking at the history of it, the type of expiation that was there, it gives you so many lessons about not harming women, not trying to play tricks, not playing around. It says that even if you say your wife is like your mom, she's not your mom. Allah says, but she's not your mom. That's why make ridiculous statements like this, which don't even make any sense. And then, what is the expiation? Freeing a slave in order to remove slaves and bring freedom to a community which slavery existed at the time. Fasting 2 months is a personal punishment and all of that. So this must be done before intimacy with the wife. Okay, so before you have intimacy. If you're not going to do it, then you're going to be separated. Dowry rights after separation. So what happens? After you consummate the marriage, after someone has consummated the marriage, and if they get divorced, the wife gets the full dowry. If the man dies, someone asked this question, if the man dies before the marriage is consummated, she gets full dowry as well. So she gets to keep her entire dowry. Why? Even though they didn't consummate the marriage, he died. So they would have had the potential to do so. So you get full rights upon death. If they were alone in private, so I think I mentioned this last time, right? Consummation of marriage means alone in private behind closed doors. She gets full dowry. So that counts as consummation. If she's divorced before consummating the marriage, she only gets half the dowry. Okay, so she has to return half back to him. So this is one of the things again. This is one of the reasons of abusing the husband again for money. Maintenance. So real quick, maintenance is a requirement for the wife. You have to maintain, you have to provide maintenance for your wife in a marriage. And for her minor children or your minor children, this is a requirement on the husband as long as she decides to remain in the house. And the maintenance is according to his financial status. So a husband is responsible for taking care of the household. That's his responsibility. And for the minor children as well, not for the adult children, although there is a responsibility there as well. So this means man is the head of the household, but he's also responsible for taking care of the children and the wife. And it depends on his financial status. So if his financial status is very tight, he doesn't have very much money, then she's entitled to what kind of living standard he can provide for her. She cannot demand and say, well, I want a Mercedes, and I want this, and I want a big house, and the guy doesn't even make that much money. If he has a high financial status, and he has a lot of money, then she has right to that stuff proportionately, based upon the type of wealth that he has. So for example, if he's got a lot of money, and he can afford like a maid, and she demands, I want to have a maid, and my parents had a maid, and I come from this background, then you're entitled to that. If you don't have that kind of status, or you don't come from that kind of family, we talked about that last week, then he doesn't have that kind of right. What does it include? It includes housing, it includes clothing, it includes food, and things like that. And perhaps today we can encompass some other things in there, like, access to Islamic education, access to other types of education which are important, access to a cell phone, access to, all of these type of things. If she leaves the house, she doesn't have the right to maintenance anymore. So if she runs away and says, well, I'm not staying in the house anymore because I'm mad at you and I'm punishing you, and she loses her right to that maintenance. During a divorced wife's waiting period, so while she's in the waiting period, she's entitled to that maintenance. A woman has the right to live in a separate house when she gets married where no other family members live. Now this is hotly contested in cultural circles, right? Is that you don't have a right to, you marry into this family, you're going to be living here, and that's the way my parents want it, and that's the way it is. You're going to live here with the family and everything. And the woman says, no, I want my own dwelling, not in the same house, not with people walking around all over the place, and the brother-in-law, and I have to put on hijab, and I have to do this and all that. She has the right to demand separate lodging, where no one else is there. So she has the right to that. That's part of her maintenance. The husband may prevent her, because remember, the husband is in charge of the household. He's supposed to do what's best for the household. He may prevent people from visiting the house. So he has that right. He says, this friend of yours, I can just tell she's a problem maker. Every time, she comes in the house, she's, criticizing something, and she's making, problems, and she's saying, oh, you live so poorly, or your furniture is so like this, and can't your husband get you some, better, toys for the children to play with, or whatever it is. You don't like this woman, she's causing a problem, or whoever it is. You can prevent her from coming into the house. Okay? So the husband has that right to prevent even her parents or her family from coming into the house. Right? Now, he should have good grounds for doing so. Right? Normally, you should maintain good family relationships. But he has the right in terms of the house. Okay? Or other family members. But he does not have the right to prevent her from talking to her family members or her parents or meeting them or whatever it is. Okay? I know it said at any time here. If he restricts certain time because he feels that time is problematic or something like that, perhaps that could be allowed. But he can't stop her from actually having a relationship with her family. Right? This is something that's not allowed, because that's within her personal rights. Okay? If a man cannot provide adequate maintenance for his wife, because this is interesting, it's hard to get this enacted, in America, but if a man cannot provide adequate maintenance for his wife, she's not giving him the money that she deserves and everything, she can take a loan on his behalf, and he has to pay for it. So now you can't implement this rule, but I just thought it's a very interesting rule. She could literally go to the store and say, you know what? Maybe not the iPhone, but I want that Nokia Lumia smartphone. I need a phone, and he's not even buying me a phone. Right? So I need that phone, and my husband, he's going to be paying you for it. Right? And he's entitled to pay for that. Right? You can't really enforce that anyways here, but potentially she has that right. If a man is absent, so the man is missing, he's on a business trip or he's gone somewhere, and he's not spending on his wife, but he has money. The judge has so this is all about judgment, it's another chapter, but the judge has the right or has the authority to take money from his bank account and give it to his family. If he has the right and he's neglecting them, he can check the case. If the case matches up, he has the right to take out money and give it to them. So the modern court system, we oftentimes talk about these things and say, oh, well, see, the American system is helping and all that. It's there in the Islamic system as well. It's not that you can't do that. The judge has the right to do that, but you don't say that, the local scholar or the local family members have the right to do that, because it has to be something coming from the government. Otherwise, too much room for abuse, right? The wife, however, so there's always balance of powers here, balance of abuse here. The wife cannot claim what is past due if she didn't receive maintenance. So she says, she goes to the judge and she says, you know what, he's not taking care of me and he has to do this. And the judge says, you know what, you're right. He should have been giving you this much money per month and you deserve this for your children and everything. She says, yes, he agrees with me. And you know what, this has been going on for 10 years. So he owes me all that backlog of money. No, it doesn't work that way. You should have complained earlier. So it's not a backlog unless the judge had previously issued that you have this right, and then he neglected your right. Or the husband had agreed to it and he violated his promise. Okay? Pregnant women will get maintenance until the baby is delivered. The pregnant women who've been divorced, they will get that maintenance until the baby is delivered or the baby is lost. Maintenance for other family members. So, are you responsible for other family members? Is the guy responsible particularly for other family members? Yes. So it's required particularly for a man to take care of his parents and to take care of his grandparents, especially when they're poor. Right? So if they're poor and they can't take care of themselves, he's required to take care of them, whether they are Muslim or they're not Muslim. So that's important. So even if they're not Muslims, he still has an obligation to take care of them. It's also required for you to take care of your blood relatives. And who are your blood relatives? The ones that are prohibited to you in marriage. That level of closeness when they're poor. So if they're poor and they're minors and they're women or they're chronically ill or they're mentally disabled, you have to take care of them. Meaning they can't take care of themselves, you have an obligation to take care of them. If they can take care of themselves and they have money and wealth and everything, you don't have an obligation to take care of them and send them money. But if they're poor or they don't have that or they fall into one of these categories, you have an obligation to take care of them. The extent of the care to each one is proportionate to the ratio of inheritance shares that each one of them are going to get. And we're going to cover inheritance on the last day of class. So what that means is, say, okay, you have a poor uncle, and then you have a poor grandfather, and then you have a poor brother, right? So who gets what and what's the proportion? How much money should you send? You have $1,000 you can send to each one of them every month. It's proportionate to their inheritance shares that they would be getting from you if you were to die. So you have to know inheritance to figure out what ratio that is. Now that's more like recommended. You can kind of distribute, but it should be along those lines. Lastly, child custody. The mother generally has more right to the custody of the child when the couple is separated. That's provided with a very important condition that she's not remarrying. Okay, if she's not remarrying and she's staying single and the child is young, then she generally has more right to the child custody for that period of time. Okay. After the mother, if it's not the mother, then it could be the maternal grandmother, then the paternal grandmother, then the sisters, then the maternal aunt, then the paternal aunt. It keeps on going that way. The reason is, basically what it's saying is, women generally have more priority to the children, provided that they don't get married. The only exception is the grandmother. So the grandmother can remain married to her husband, obviously, the grandfather, but she still has a right to taking care of the child, because the child needs that. They need the motherly care and all of that. If they get married, otherwise the other ones, if they're married, then they're going to be losing that right. Practically, child custody is something which there's a lot of different opinions among scholars. The different opinions don't really matter from a practical perspective. Why? Because child custody is something that is so apparent, it's going to be going through the law system. Whatever system it is going through a law system. So a judge is definitely going to be deciding child custody. And the judge is going to decide whatever madhab or whatever opinion the judge follows, that's what's going to happen. It doesn't matter what you think or what you care or what you want or something. Whatever the judge is going to be decreeing, that's what's going to happen. The only time it's beneficial to know the different opinions is when the judge is willing to take your advice or take your opinion, when the couple agree together that I'm willing to give up custody to this person, or I'm willing to give up custody to the other person. The real binding principle is this: the person who gets custody is the one who's going to be able to raise the child better. That's the real underlying principle. Meaning, Islamically, for this child, who's going to raise the child better? So if the mother is the mother, but she's a drug, addict mother, she should not get custody of the child. If she's a mother who does not pray, and she has no Islamic values whatsoever, and the father does, then she, and all of these other women have the same problem, then they do not get right to the child, and the judge, Islamic Muslim judge, should not be ruling and giving it to these people. So in reality, the real underlying, principle, if they're all equal, then the women takes precedence. If they're not equal, and one of them is going to be better Islamically for the future of the child, that's the one that the judge needs to decide and give that custody to that person. The last point is for non-Muslims. If either spouse is a Muslim, the children will obviously be raised on Islam. So, if a man marries, let's say, a Christian, the child has to be raised upon Islam. If one spouse is from the people of the book, meaning if a Christian marries an idolater, for example, and the Muslim judge is ruling, this is when Muslims are, a Muslim state, the child will be raised according to the people of the book. Which means it's very interesting. So under an Islamic state, you don't go and take people's children from them and say, well, we're going to give the child to the state and we're going to raise them according to Islam. It doesn't work that way. So if one of the parents was people of the book, one of them was an idolater, precedence goes to the people of the book because they're closer to Islam. So that's where we give precedence. So anyways, that's that. Let's take a 10-minute break and then we'll resume in the musalla, maybe in the middle of the musalla area for Q&A, inshallah. Okay. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. So, let's see how many questions there are, otherwise I'll start going through my questions. Please make sure to raise your hand before I call on you, and make sure to answer your question, or ask your question in the form of a question, rather than in the form of a comment, inshallah. So any questions, inshallah, on divorce, particularly in divorce? Yes. In the irrevocable divorce, there is no time limit for them to get remarried. The only condition is that they have to try and move on by marrying somebody else. No. Irrevocable divorce means the final divorce. It's been done 3 times. Right? Or you're talking about the second divorce? Second divorce pronounced once, and then it concludes. Okay, the waiting period has ended. Yes, no, there's no. Once the waiting period is ended, there's no time. They can get remarried. Yeah, they can get remarried because that was the waiting period for them. Yeah. Divorce does happen in pregnancy, yes, but then the waiting period is changed to the pregnancy. Okay, so the question is, what is the wisdom behind divorce being so easy, whereas marriage is difficult? To be honest, neither of them are easy or difficult. Initially. So marriage is actually not difficult. We've made it difficult. And divorce is not actually that easy, but we've made it easy. This is the problem. So marriage, actually all marriage requires is 2 witnesses a dowry, and the marriage contract and the acceptance and approval. That's all. It's very simple actually to get married, but we made it very difficult. Divorce should take at least 3 menstrual periods, require, one pronouncement of divorce, require all the other rulings, require proper maintenance, proper, custody and all of that. But we made it easy by throwing in this, I want to cancel my own rights and everything. So in reality, it's the opposite way. Actually, marriage is a lot easier than divorce, but we flipped it around. So why does it occur? Because the thing is, why does divorce occur even if you don't have the intention, but the wording is clear? The reason is, Allah, had to decide between one of two things. Either one, hold people to their oaths, or hold people to their words in order to prevent the wife from being harmed because of his, fake statements or whatever, or make divorce more difficult by not counting it. So you have to choose one or the other. Which one takes precedence? And Allah decided that the harm to the wife should be prevented, and that's a greater and more important than making the divorce harder. So whenever you make a decision on one law this way or one law that way, you have to choose one wisdom. So he chose that wisdom. That's the reasoning behind it. Okay, and they already got married. Okay, so they already got married. The dowry was very large, and now he's not able to pay the dowry. And she's demanding the dowry, and it's her right, and he doesn't have the money. Can that be grounds for divorce? Technically, it could be ground for khula, you mean? For release? Or from the woman's side? Yeah, it can be grounds for release of the marriage. But from a wisdom perspective, well, yeah, it can be grounds. It can be grounds. The thing is, if she's doing that because she wants the money and she's entitled to it, if she releases the contract, she's still not going to get it anyways. So if her intention is, well, I'm going to go marry someone else who actually has the money and who's well off and is going to give me a good lifestyle, yeah, she's entitled to that. Yeah. In fact, they're supposed to put the man in jail because anytime you're not able to pay off your debts, Islamically, you're supposed to be put in jail. Right? So technically, if she's demanding and she has the right and it's been a long amount of time and he was in a difficult circumstance, but it's been going on for a long time and he's not able to give the dowry and she demands it and she's not willing to forgive it, that's like a debt that's owed to him. So she has the right to petition that, he be put in jail. But usually you're put in jail when you have the money but you don't want to pay the debt, not when you don't have the money. So if you don't have the money, if you put your own husband in jail, what is that going to do for you? That wouldn't make sense. But if the guy has the money and he's not giving it to you, then you have the right to demand it, and the judge will do that. And if he still refuses, no, I'm not going to give the money, then he can be imprisoned until he pays. Oh, they really don't have it, and they're put in jail? No, they shouldn't be put in jail. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, if she wanted to get out, she has that right. Now it's not the most virtuous thing to do. But if she says, I want to have a good life, I want a nice lifestyle, and I'm used to this, and I want a nice house and everything, and this guy promised me everything, and he pretended like, or he had money at the time, and he promised me this, he didn't give it to me, and now I'm living like this, I don't want to live like this anymore. She has the right to do that. Although it may not be the most virtuous thing, patience may be better. Okay. Yeah, she has to give back part of the dowry, but depending on what the guy's going to accept. No, walima does not have to be done within 7 days. Walima can be done anytime after the marriage is done. It's just to announce. Now, it's recommended to be done earlier, but it can be done. There's no specific time period where it has to be done by. It will still count. Yeah. So if you put a simple condition or a ridiculous condition to the divorce, it will still count because of the fact that divorce, even if you're joking, counts. So this will also count. So it's very serious. So if you say something really ridiculous, like, if you sit down in that chair, then you're going to be divorced. You shouldn't say something foolish like that in the first place. So as a punishment, to take it seriously, it's going to count. It's going to count. So you should not make statements like that, If you don't make that meal right now in the next 30 minutes, you're divorced. Something like that. You shouldn't be making those statements. So in order to make sure you don't make those statements, these statements count. Otherwise, if they didn't count, you just keep making these statements. Everything would be, and a lot of guys do this. Everything is about divorce, If you don't, stay in the car right now, you're going to be divorced. And if you don't eat this, then you're going to be divorced. If you don't do this, you're going to be divorced. If it didn't count, then it would just be a avenue to harm the wife. Okay, so the question is, how do you plan if you have 3 months for the husband to decide whether to retract the divorce or not? Once the divorce takes place, you just move out like that all of a sudden. The thing is, if a divorce takes place, or even if there's marital discord, you should always try to be prepared in the first place. Now, usually you have family or you have someone to stand back on. If you're a revert or something and you don't have family to go back to, or your family's thrown you out or something like that, you're right, this is a very difficult situation. So that's where the Muslim community is supposed to be coming in. Because if there's no support from the government, or there's no Muslim government, then the Muslim community needs to be there for you. Now that comes back to the dysfunctionality of our systems. So we're supposed to have a bunch of different support systems in place. Zakat in place, charitable causes in place, family in place. If all of them break down, then Islam is not going to be able to function with a completely dysfunctional society. And unfortunately, sometimes that's the case we're living in. So it's not the fault of the laws, because no laws can really do anything for you in that case. So we just need to strengthen our institutions so that we can provide that safety net for people. So we'll conclude inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.